Hi, and thanks for joining me. This is the show where regular people like yourself get to share real experiences and insights about pain and life. In these casual conversations, we're usually talking about a type of pain that strikes from out of the clear blue, while we're just living life, often doing everyday things that we've done what seems like a million times before. But for some reason, one day, the body suddenly decides it's just had enough. So, is this pain the beginning of the end? Is it a sign of a more serious defect? Are you going to have pain for the rest of your life now? What do you do when this happens to you? Do you reach for over-the-counter pain meds, ice, or heat? Do you turn to your medical doctor or a chiropractor? What about acupuncture, PT, massage? Are you someone who gets irritated by the intrusion of pain? Or does pain scare you and stress you out? Maybe you're someone who just ignores it and have been able to laugh it off for most of your life. I'm your host, Yaling Liu, and these are just some of the questions I talk about with my guests. In this podcast series, we explore everyday aches and pains from the perspective of people just like you. I'm a chiropractor, and some of these guests are my patients. I've been working with bodies in pain since 1994, and one of my favorite parts of practice is still the time I get to spend connecting with people about life as it relates to their pain. It's what continues to give me a much deeper and richer understanding. Some of the most significant breakthroughs that I see in practice happen through conversation. It's during these frank discussions that we often stumble upon realizations that can help us move forward. This is exactly why I want to share them with you here. It may not always feel like it, but I'm here to tell you that there is, in fact, always a solution. As long as you're working with a living, breathing body and brain, there will always be potential for change and improvement, just sometimes not in the way we might have been expecting. Today's conversation starts out with what my guest Steve refers to as a standard low back thing, which had me wondering briefly as I was interviewing him, how on earth am I going to make this interesting for all of you listeners, of course, but also for myself? Well, as we got talking, as so often happens on the treatment table too, initial statements and ideas morph and the layers get peeled back and the nuances come out. And so something like what Steve started by calling his standard low back thing turns out to be just the doorway into so much more. And within the natural course of our casual conversation, a number of gems and profound insights very unassumingly bubbled up. I do love getting to know the human behind the pain. And I don't think Steve even realized the true value of what he was sharing. So many times our own experiences and perspectives seem mundane because they're always with us. They become part of us, so naturally we take them for granted. I see these casual chats as an important way to polish off our old selves, to help us remember what's significant about each of us and to see life through someone else's eyes. Do you have some sort of familiar experience with pain that comes and goes and has been doing so for years? Could it also be wrapped up with a little more than meets the eye? I understand if you prefer to talk about it like it's just a standard thing, like Steve did at first, because let's face it, maybe you don't really want to give it a lot of energy or power over you after all these years. But don't you sometimes wonder why it's still part of your life? It's okay and often healthy to accept some things that seem outside of our control. But I'm just wondering if for some of us, it might be worth reevaluating from time to time whether or not your particular pain truly has to be one of those things that you simply accept. My guest today is not a patient of mine. He is someone who I met while at a national awards dinner in Portland for indie book publishers. Steve and I placed in the same category with our adult nonfiction work. And so that evening we sat together during the awards dinner, nervously sharing in our excitement over tying for silver in that category. Steve is most recently a teacher, and his book is called Be a Better Writer. It's geared towards making writing less intimidating by breaking it down into easily digestible segments. He wrote with his young students in mind, but it's really a fun resource for anyone of any age. And if by chance you're someone who teaches or dabbles in writing yourself, I encourage you to check it out. Just in the few hours we had together over dinner that first night in Portland, I learned that Steve has had quite a journey with his own pain, and I knew immediately that he had something worth sharing, although we didn't get into it that evening. But the topic of my own book about everyday pain clearly resonated with him, and is part of why we connected. So when he came to town recently, we met for dinner, and I couldn't resist interviewing him, even though it meant doing most of it in a noisy restaurant setting, as you'll hear in just a minute. Let me just take a quick moment here before proceeding. There is some mild expressive use of colorful words here and there, so now hopefully you will still be able to listen, but not be unpleasantly surprised if that sort of language normally offends you.
My name is Steve. I'm 54 years old. I like to think I'm in pretty good health. I'm a writer, basically. I've been an educator. I've been a computer person. I've been a product development guy. I've had a whole bunch of fun careers. But right now I work in education and I write books. And so I have a pretty standard low back thing.
When did it start?
I think I don't know when it started, because I probably have felt this way for a long time, and I've just thought, I'm a little sore, because I've had those weeks where I worked 100 hours. What I used to think was like I was breaking my back. I used to think like I was shredding myself every time I
really
get up, and I'm getting old, and I have arthritis. Everything's bad.
Maybe you can relate to this. Even though present-day Steve sees his lower back pain as standard, meaning he doesn't see it as a big deal, he says he used to feel like he was breaking his back when it first started happening. I also heard him say something about how he thought it meant he was getting old. Those are two very common ideas I hear about when patients in pain come to see me. When someone is having their first experience with a pain, it can often feel very scary. On the other hand, there is also this desire to downplay it, in response to the fear, perhaps. And the most common way to do that seems to be to blame it on aging, hoping that maybe this is just what happens and that everyone else experiences this too, some sort of comfort in shared suffering. And yet, doesn't the idea of painful aging bring up another greater fear of the end being closer? That only presents yet another scary idea, doesn't it, in the beginning of the end. Of course, if something that you used to do over and over again suddenly starts to hurt years later, a natural conclusion would be that something must be wearing out. It's not quite that mechanistic for the human body, though. We are not just machines with gears and hinges that are getting rusty. There's a whole array of input and output options, not unlike a computer, but even more complex and variable depending on an infinite number of factors, if you can imagine that. Unlike machines, we actually have built-in self-repairing functions that we just need to learn how to optimize. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to get out of our own way, and those things that feel like they've worn out have a chance to recover and feel better when we do that. We do fall into ruts, and we can experience reactions to repetitive patterns that are not great for us, but we aren't actually breaking down in the way that some of the health headlines would have us believe these days. Steve is about to remind us again of how when unfamiliar pain first happens, it can be very scary. When we start to trust that we're not as fragile as it might seem when we first have new pain, that our parts are not, in fact, actually wearing out, that our ability to adapt to stress is just changing and asking us to pay attention. Only then are we better able to find ways to avoid pain. Okay, so let's hear about how Steve's pain actually started.
What was that like?
It was
Do you remember what happened?
Yes, it was like sneezing, right? Or stepping into the shower or anything, any normal thing. And then it's like locked up completely. And the biggest shot of pain I can imagine. Now, I now know what that pain is. I know how to breathe through it. I know what I just did and how not to make it worse. But the first couple times it happened, it was like I have just paralyzed myself, sneezing.
Scary.
It was a little scary, yeah.
It's important to point out that what Steve describes as how his pain happened is not really how it started, but just the point at which he experienced it. at its worst. When things like sneezing or stepping into the shower start to leave you with blinding pain, then you're getting information about something that has been brewing for a while, just under the radar. Like a bucket that has slowly been filling with water, but now it's reached the brim and it takes almost nothing to cause an overflow. My guess is, and I get the sense that Steve realizes this also, the cause for his pain was a combination of things, one of which was sitting in his chair at the computer. Now, it's never just sitting that causes problems, but as Steve and I keep talking, it becomes clear what the other contributing factors might have been for him that decreased his body's tolerance for the marathon hours in his chair at such a young age, and more recently, the stress of traveling by airplane.
You don't have any specific thing that you think made it go from manageable to five alarm fire?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're listening, ladies and gentlemen, here's the thing. You want to have a good back? Work on the abs. I have a set of 4 abdominal exercises. Well, 3.
I thought you were going to say you have a 4-pack.
Right. No. I wish. I got a 0-pack right now. I went to PT and they just gave me 4 exercises, and one actually turns out to be basically cobra pose, which is just for the what do they call it, the longitudinous or the laceradinous or whatever the thing is you're supposed to get.
I think I like your terms better.
whatever that thing is called, I don't know. But, lordosis.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah, they want a good lordosis. I said, I don't want that. No, they said, yes, you do. You want it. No, the reality is that if I don't do 5 minutes of which aren't even ab exercises. I mean, basically they are the simplest things, but in fact, they do go from lower abdomen, middle, upper, and then I do the cobra thing at the end. If I don't do that for a month, I'm going to have this problem every single time.
Steve seems to have had some good guidance from his PTs. The advice to work your abs is complicated, and I need to warn you all that when your lower back is in pain, the last thing you should do is to think about flexing your abdominal muscles in the classical way. It's the most common misconception that I run up against with patients, and the main problem is the part that gets lost in translation. When we say core, many people hear and think abs, abdominal muscles, those things that give us that six-pack appearance. Core strength is something that starts with spinal stability deep inside, many layers underneath the abdominal muscles. When you have had the right kind of guidance, you come to understand that core stabilization is not the same thing as abdominal exercise. Picture your torso as an apple. The abs and the back muscles are the outer flesh and the apple peel. The spine is the apple core at the very center. The things that strengthen abdominal muscles can be very stressful for a spine that is missing core stability. And core stabilization exercises don't work if your only goal is to work the superficial abdominal muscles. This is why when Steve is talking about what he calls his ab exercises, you'll hear him actually say that they aren't even ab exercises and actually involve very small movements. And the last of his 4 ab exercises is a variation on the more familiar cobra pose from yoga. If you aren't familiar with yoga, this is a position that gently accentuates the arch in the lower back. It starts by being face down, and very slowly and gently you push yourself up with your arms and peel the torso up off the floor while allowing your belly to relax. So when used in a therapeutic setting, this is referred to as part of the McKenzie protocol for lower back rehabilitation. And of course, there's more to it than just cobra pose. Robin McKenzie was a physical therapist from New Zealand who back in the 1950s developed a system of diagnosis and treatment for a common but specific type of lower back pain. Many of his exercises are focused on reducing structural strain at the level of the spinal bones and discs. One of the ideas he spearheaded was that the lower back needs to retain or return to its natural shape in order to be stable and pain-free, and that shape is the opposite of a pelvic tuck. This natural low back sway is called a lordosis, and we have the same shape in the neck. That's where we refer to it as the cervical lordosis, but the shape is the same. In the low back, what it amounts to is allowing both your buttocks and your belly to gently protrude. So all of that effort you put into sucking in the gut and tucking your butt might actually be part of the problem.
travel a lot. Do you feel like air travel is exceptionally impactful, or do you feel like you manage so well that it doesn't?
That's a really good question. I will say this about air travel. It is harder and harder and harder all the time.
In general?
In general. So whether or not you're in first class or whatever, just the fact that you may not be getting home tonight, or you may end up with a 14-hour day in airplanes, in airports and running around. It's just a high stress, bad eating kind of day.
Oh, you bring up a good point. So you're really messing with your chemistry.
Everything, your sleep patterns.
Yeah.
I have no remedy for the problem of flying, but I am completely changing my business so that I only get on airplanes when I want to. And I just don't think I want to fly very much anymore.
Yeah, good for you.
So,
do you feel like there's an age thing with that as well? An aging body thing, or just...
Yeah, but there didn't have to be.
So, even though we heard him say early on that when this was still a new pain and a bit scary, it made younger Steve worry that his body was getting old. When he now says the discomfort of traveling doesn't have to be worse with age, he is showing the evolution of his understanding about his body and the pain it has had over the years. He's right. Pain and discomfort is not ever just due to aging. Even though it's easy to blame getting older, it's a factor for sure, but the more we understand the other aspects in our life that can contribute, and then learn about some of the good reasons an aging body has for reacting the way that it does, we start to see that there is a lot we can actually still do about it. The other thing that Steve nailed is the fact that not only is airplane travel hard because it presents a series of mechanical strains, pulling and lifting your luggage, or sitting in one position for hours on end in a cramped space, but it's actually also the number of non-mechanical factors that come from unpredictable food choices, poor hydration, disrupted sleep. The happiness of your muscles and joints depends on good hydration and sleep, both of which are important for keeping stress chemicals from building up. Bad circulation and a buildup of stress chemicals can contribute to inflammation. And inflammation is a huge underlying trigger for body pains. Talking to Steve made me realize that even though those subtle non-mechanical influences of things like stress and sleep are always in the back of my mind, I tend to spend more time with patients who are planning for air travel by warning them about how to mitigate the potential stress factors to their structure, like bag carrying and sitting. I want to help them hopefully feel more comfortable in the moment, but I'm guilty of forgetting to appropriately highlight the importance of hydration, nutrient intake, and sleep factors. Perhaps I'm projecting a little bit about how much harder those things are to control for myself too in these situations. Staying realistic is really important to me with what we choose to focus on when trying to make changes. Small, agreeable, attainable goals that are easy to remember. That's what works, and it's always a very good start. Sometimes the illusion of control over uncomfortable situations is what gives us the most relief, and that might actually have to be the topic of a future episode. This next clip picks up where we left off, considering that air travel doesn't necessarily have to feel so terrible just based on an aging body. And so we catch Steve going off on a bit of a tangent, but stick with it and you'll see where he's going with that idea.
I'd gone from a kid with a BA in English to head of product development for a publicly traded company.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, except
it doesn't sound like your body was
miserable.
on your mind at all.
No, and here's the thing, okay? Here's the spiritual thing. I am not religious. I am not really a woo-woo kind of guy, but enough things have happened in my life that I don't question. There is no way in hell, if my body hadn't fallen apart, that I would have ever stopped this. It was so much fun. It was what I'd always wanted to do, and I would have been a goddamn millionaire. But you know what? I would have ended up just like Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would have worked and worked and worked and worked and worked because it's not work to me.
I want to pause here for a second to ask you if you are also someone who enjoys your work like Steve says he did during his early ventures, despite the physical toll it took. And if so, has the strain caught up to you yet? Or Are you, like a few of my patients, still making your chiropractor scratch her head because you're not nearly as quote-unquote messed up as she expects you to be based on what you do with your body for hours on end? What Steve is about to explain is a concept that I've seen the proof of repeatedly in practice, and I catch people at all different phases in this journey. Some are loving their work, but can no longer tolerate physical aspects of it. Others are loving their work and doing incredible things that I think should be hurting them, but their body offers very little evidence of that. And it's not necessarily a matter of, oh, just wait till you get to be my age, or the idea that it'll eventually catch up, until you've been doing that thing for so and so many years. It really seems more dependent on something that can feel like a mysterious X factor. So different for everybody and every situation. But Steve does a good job of getting about as close as we can to an explanation for this quirk of human existence based on his observations and a little reading he's done.
I've known a lot of musicians, certainly, and the ones that are healthy have one sort of mental profile, and the ones that are not so healthy have a different mental profile. And the ones that are healthy make sure that as they go through their career, they are always pretty much aware of when they're not liking the music they're making or the situation they're in. And they just find their way to a new situation. The people who tend to have the physical problems that go with a repetitive thing, like music, are the ones who generally have gigs that after a few years they don't like, and they just stick with them.
Oh,
so it's not. It's called Parker Palmer, sort of my favorite guru on this. He calls it living a divided life. You doing what you should versus doing what you need or want. And he has a one wonderful way of saying this. So, say for example, in the case of a musician, I might be touring with the best band in the planet. Really, I might have really reached the pinnacle. But after a couple years on the road, it's just not that exciting anymore. I'm just not liking it. I'm missing my family. I'm tired, whatever. But it's the best gig I'm ever going to have in my life, right? Or if I have to get out of my contract, I'm going to get sued.
Oh, gosh.
Right?
Oh,
It's complicated.
Feeling stuck, right?
Well, not just stuck, trapped.
Yeah, right.
And you are legitimately trapped.
Yeah.
Parker Palmer says this, and I have known it to be true because it's worked in my life and it's played out in many other people's lives. He says no pain anyone will mete out against you will be stronger than the pain you mete out against yourself when you conspire in your own diminishment.
Ooh, that's
when
good.
you go to work every day
yeah.
and make yourself less of who you are, you are conspiring in your own diminishment. You're getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Parker Palmer is a writer, a teacher, and an activist who, among a few other books, wrote one called A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey Toward an Undivided Life. And that's what Steve's talking about. Conspiring in your own diminishment results in pain. It's possible the pain Parker Palmer was referring to is metaphorical, but if you ask me, I think it applies to physical pain. So the next time you find yourself in pain, even though you're simply engaging in life the way you have for years, maybe it's time to ask yourself the question about what circumstances have changed or simply added up over time to result in a situation where you might be conspiring in your own diminishment. Could it be that loving your work has much less to do with happiness and long-term well-being than you think? And if that's the case, then so many of the people who spend a lifetime looking for that one job that we feel moved by or passionate about might find some comfort in this perspective. Just because you love it doesn't mean it will love you back, I suppose. And do those things you love about it outweigh the things that are not as lovable about it? Because inevitably there will always be some of that.
So what happened to me was this. I got into the software business because I really wanted to make something cool that would help people enjoy music. I was very successful, owing largely to my business partner, who is brilliant. He and I were very, very, very successful together. And we got bought by a company that I should not have sold the company to, even though at the time I had $70,000 in credit card debt and $18 in the bank. I should not have sold the company because I knew they were not a good company. They were not filled with good people. They were not there to make good things. They were there to scam old ladies out of their, well, not old ladies, but whoever's dumb enough to buy startup stock, IPO stock.
That's too bad.
It's okay. It's really normal. All IPOs work that way. So what did I learn? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be involved in publicly traded companies. Lesson learned. Pain. I had chronic pain out of being successful. Remember, I didn't get the big bad pain until I was at the pinnacle of my career.
Yeah.
So in the world of work, in the world of money, in the world of people who can be taken advantage of, and especially when children or poor people are involved, I can get a pretty bad stomach ache if I know anything is not the way it should be. I let this go at a company because I got my dream job.
That makes a lot of sense. And then you got the pain as a souvenir.
Yeah, and I kept it for a long time. Yeah. In fact, it's lifelong. This is not pain I ever get rid of. It just doesn't.
There are times when you don't have it though, right?
Well, I would say 99% of the time I don't have it.
Oh, but it's a familiar friend that comes to visit.
Yeah. And I would say in an odd way that I guess the way I see success now is the degree to which I can integrate all my past experience into my present experience. So I really think now about how much experience, how much can I live life, how full a life can I have? And then can I integrate good, bad, boring, otherwise experiences into my next set of experiences? And that's really successful to me.
What Steve described here is not a physical injury. It's a moral conflict that arose from his work situation. His low back pain began intensely after that shift in his professional life took place. After he made the decision, unwittingly at the time, to conspire in his own diminishment, as he put it, by making a compromise that he did not feel good about in his gut. Now, something that struck me is how he said, pain that I never get rid of. And yet, when I asked him, he clarifies that actually 99% of the time, he doesn't feel it actively. I have to attribute this fact to his awareness and the use of the physical therapy exercises that he knows work. So I believe the sense that it's always with him is less about the pain being there and more about his active self-care that he knows keeps it at bay. In this sense, it's very important that he continue to hold the pain in his awareness. But I also wonder how this language affects, if it does, affect his experience of the pain. By embracing the idea that it's a pain that he never gets rid of, is that holding him back? Or is it helping him stay in control of it by not becoming complacent? I did really like hearing Steve's upgraded definition of success. It seems like a positive consequence from the entire experience of the early career success. Integration of past learned experiences. It's really the best we can all hope for. The successful part, however, is recognizing it and being at peace with that, no matter how it looks.
Somebody told me a long time ago that rather than thinking about balance in life, they would prefer to think you thought of it as mix. Sometimes you need a little more of this, a little less of that. A little more of this, a little less of that. A little more time with these people, a little less time for yourself. A little more time for yourself, a little less time doing this or that. It's about
more
a
like
mix.
Balancing the equation so that, one side cancels out the other side eventually. Or maybe not, ever.
Well, no. People love balance. It's a wonderful metaphor. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm simply saying that for me, and for many of the people who I speak to, when I'm out talking to a group of people, and they're always talking about work-life balance, how do I balance my needs of my students with my needs of my blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, you can spend your whole life falling off the balance beam if you want. Now, I did strive for balance during the whole time I was killing myself. And of course, never achieved it, no matter how much time I took off or, whatever. So balance eluded me, but I kept thinking I have to find balance.
Here, I'm grateful to Steve for this perspective. I have to admit, I talk a lot about balance in regards to the three-pronged approach managing mechanical, biochemical, and emotional stress, and never thought about the fact that striving for balance in each and all of these areas may in fact bring on a sort of stress from the potential futility of it. It's easy to get overwhelmed when we know what it is we're supposed to be doing to get to that perfect equilibrium. And this is a new awareness that I'll take with me into my patient interactions. This exchange with Steve is a great example of how my time with patients continues to expand my consciousness. Okay, now we reach the point in the interview when Steve and I get kicked out of the restaurant because it's closing time, and there's apparently a lot more to chat about than we realized. So we've moved briefly to the car while we finish our conversation, and you'll notice the change in sound. Where we pick up now is right after I asked Steve to tell me what he thinks he's learned from his pain.
The best thing I've learned to do is to simply see it as a thing that is. If I feel some pain and I get worried, scared, pissed because if I did something X and I won't be able to do Y or whatever, the pain just gets worse. It just seems to get worse. If I go, that's my lower back thing on the right side this time. I thought it was the left but it's the right. It's the right. Okay. Oh, right. I'm compressing on the right now. Okay. All right. I see that. And I breathe a little bit. It always relaxes a little. The worst that happens is I go, you know what? I hurt my back. And so I have 9 or 10 different things I know that will make it better. One is just quit working. Sometimes I can't, so I can move to my standing desk instead of sitting, or change my chair, or just get up and walk around for 2 minutes, or whatever. Take 14 aspirin. There are so many things.
Don't do this at home, kids.
Right, yeah. No, the interesting thing about pain, and I was as a kid, I was a pretty scaredy cat kid. I still am kind of a chicken shit, really. But I was a pretty scaredy cat kid, and I would have said I had just the worst, lowest easy pain tolerance. I had no tolerance for pain. I was a very scaredy cat kid. As it turns out, I apparently have a massive tolerance for pain. But I don't think that's what it is. I don't think about it that way.
About pain tolerance, this fascinates me. It's something I grapple with regularly because it matters so much and yet is so hard to define. The disconnect between what we think about ourselves and how much pain we actually tolerate is very common, especially with the complicated pain cases. I find people who learn to disregard their pain, whether that's because of shame or some other lifelong learned behavior, they end up with much more complicated pain that then more easily becomes chronic. And yet, these same people are the ones most likely to apologize for their quote-unquote wimpiness when it comes to seeking help. It's the actual wimps that I would put myself in the same category with, who, because they are good at recognizing early warning pain and not pushing through it, they are the lucky ones who escape being saddled with true chronic pain. Of course, depending on their outlook and attitudes and a number of other psychological factors, us wimps of the world may or may not consider our experiences with little pains to be little. I think for some people, the little pains are big, and it's all about context and individual interpretations of pain based on our past experiences. I guarantee you this will be a topic that comes up again and again in future episodes. There's so much to talk about when it comes to the biology and the psychology of pain.
And what's really interesting is we can bring situational awareness to any minute thing. And what's absolutely fascinating to me is if I can realize that I am having a particular thought, say, my nose really hurts. That's a thought.
Yeah.
I get to ask myself the question, who the hell is asking that question? Well, it's me, but I am not my thoughts. That's the big realization for me anyway of meditation, of pain, of all parts of my life that are complicated, is that I'm not my thoughts. I'm having a thought.
And you're bringing up a great point because of the connection between pain being something that also comes from the brain down, right?
Sure.
So to be able to say, I am not my pain, has got to be really powerful.
Yeah, you know what? I've never said that, but it is in fact true. It's just never occurred to me in that way. But, for a long time, I think pain did define me. I wouldn't have said pain. I would have said disability.
Oh.
But I felt disabled because I was always in pain.
There is ever decreasing doubt that how we talk about our pain and how others talk to us about our pain can completely change the pain experience and trajectory. This is one of the most prominent advances in pain science, thanks to a better understanding of the neurobiology behind what used to be written off as simply psychological. Now we understand that psychologically contributing factors to all aspects of health can actually transform our biology and affect outcomes. So language becomes extremely pivotal in the pain experience, not just words we say, but words we think as well. Steve's realization years ago that, first of all, he was able to say, I am not my thoughts, I believe inferred to him at a subconscious level the next natural concept of I am not my pain. The question here is, how do we actualize this concept? How do we go from knowing this is true to feeling its truth at our core? What I also find fascinating is that Steve's language of choice at the time was to think of himself as disabled rather than simply in pain. Knowing what the science says about the role of language in case outcomes makes me wonder if this choice of words reflected a deeper core belief. Is that core belief still there? Did it affect the duration and intensity of Steve's struggle with lower back pain years ago? Is it part of the reason he still considers this pain part of his life? None of these questions have clear-cut answers, but they are questions that more and more people are realizing need asking. It sounds like the mindfulness piece is really huge for you in dealing with it and how it's helped you through a lot of things. Yeah. Is there anything else, do you think, or is that just really the top of the...
Well, I think that's the foundational piece, because the one thing I liked about it is it only involves breathing, and you just carry your breath with you everywhere you go. So you've always got that one in your pocket, right? Yeah. The other part of it that's really important to me is that I find it really cool to actually know what is going on in my body. Mm-hmm. So even if I don't need to know, even if knowing will have no effect, I still want to know as much as I possibly can, because I actually think it's interesting.
I think it's really important to know. I think it does help, but that's my bias.
No, it helps me, right? And it certainly doesn't help. But my brother is an interesting case. My brother's extremely successful businessman, Broadway actor. He just wants to get shit done. It's like, I got some pain. Let's just get rid of it. Move on. Next.
Interesting.
That didn't work. Let's do something else. So, I want to know things.
Does that mean you like to wallow in it until you understand it?
I used to. Because here's the thing, okay? So the wallowing, it's concentration, it's thought.
It's productive. It can be.
It's productive.
Yeah.
But it serves no purpose. It's like making a product no one wants to buy. And yet you continue to sell less and less of it. And you continue to make more and more of it. And then you're upset because people aren't buying it and you got a lot of inventory.
That's an interesting
And
analogy.
then what do you got to do? Well, you go bankrupt. Yeah. You really do.
Mindfulness. It's an age-old concept, but it certainly has caught on lately. Just remember, mindfulness doesn't look the same for everyone, so you don't have to worry about doing it wrong. Doing it at all is what matters, and it's all about checking in with yourself and learning how to pay attention to the right stuff. So there's the question of wallowing. Is it good or bad? I think as long as you don't get stuck in the wallowing stage and maybe have a little help to figure out how to take action, it can be an important phase that allows us to receive some much-needed TLC. Slow down, take inventory, reflect, and exercise some self-compassion. Steve really likes learning what's going on in the body. His brother, not so much. He doesn't have time for it. Who are you more like? The brother who's too busy to be bothered by pain, or the inquisitive Steve? I can see the advantages for each type of patient personality. The inquisitive patient who wants to understand more about their pain is using this knowledge to manage the stress behind what would otherwise be the unknown, the scary unknown. And we know that stress can make pain worse, so getting more information is a form of treatment or pain relief in and of itself. The busy type will demonstrate psychological fortitude of a different kind by not lingering in the experience of pain and pushing onward. Instead, they avoid over-identifying with pain. I believe these people are least likely to be hypochondriacal, but my experience with this type is that if they repeatedly ignore legitimate pain and dysfunction without finding the right kind of intervention, the pain and dysfunction will catch up with them at some point, and when it does, it is much more difficult to resolve because by that time, the brain has learned how to tune out important information about what's not working. I tend to see patients who are a bit more on the Steve side of the spectrum, who have a curiosity to learn what's going on and find out what to do about it themselves in order to feel a bit more in control of the situation. Taking the time to pay attention to the discomfort and making the effort to learn what's really behind the pain is not easy. I think it takes guts. And while you're peeking behind the curtain to see what is at the root of your pain and trying to figure out what you can do about it, remember that even though it's important to recognize that you're in control in so many ways, when it comes to health and disease and pain, it's worth remembering that you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. How you ended up with the pain is important to understand only in order to move forward, not to flog yourself about it.
See, if I can think of like the least possible effort I would have in causing my own demise. Okay, I walk across the street when the thing says walk and a bus hits me.
Okay, whoa, you're probably wondering, how did we get to talking about being hit by buses? Steve's actually making a point here about navigating the potential trap of hyper-responsibility in regards to things like pain and illness, some of which we aren't always in control of. Here's a different way to look at things and maybe a solution for you if you feel like it's your fault that you're in pain.
I walk across the street when the thing says walk and a bus hits me. And everybody agrees, totally not my fault. Okay? But if I am lucky enough to wake up in the hospital after that, there is one thing that is true. It's not fault or blame. It's just, I was there. So there's a
you
kind
play the
of
part. You're just that way.
Yeah, it happened. I was there. I was at that confluence of points in the universe. I just happened to be there. And so that gets rid of fault, it gets rid of blame, it gets rid of shame, it gets rid of guilt, it gets rid of a whole bunch of emotions which are the ones that cause the wallowing. It seems to me they're the woulda, shoulda, coulda, all that kind of stuff. If only I'd had the triple vente, whatever, instead of the double mocha, I would have been 5 seconds later and not run into that bus. You know, you can play that game all your life.
That's very Seattle of you.
I know. Well, you know, you gotta do as the Romans do, right? But I think that's another big piece. I think I don't even think you really have to be very good at meditating. You really don't. I think, honestly, you know, Herbert Spencer gave us the relaxation response, in 72? If you just, like, breathe in through your nose and a little slower out your mouth, like 3 breaths, you'll reset your autonomic nervous system. It won't solve much in the world, but you will lower your blood pressure, and that'll probably, you know, slow your heart rate. Yeah. All those things that are sort of...
Why not?
All those things.
Breathing
is really good for you, and if you learn to do it in a certain way, it can be quite helpful.
Taking control of your pain sometimes starts with something as simple as a deep breath. What a reassuring idea. At this point in the conversation, I'm seeing the benefit to interviewing an educator with a degree in English who is clearly well-read on a wide array of topics. This must be at least the 3rd reference that Steve lobbed at me. This time, he's talking about someone named Herbert Benson, even though I think he says Herbert Spencer, but it's Herbert Benson. Herbert was a Harvard physician who wrote what was, at the time, a groundbreaking book called Relaxation Response. This was back in 1975. It set out to present scientific validation for transcendental meditation specifically, TM. Breathing is one of 9 steps that he outlined, and he shed light on the notion that full, deep abdominal breaths could exert a real physiological impact on the nervous system to cause relaxation.
So feel like you have any last thoughts that you want to tack on? Or?
I used to be sort of a one true thing kind of person. If I could just find that one thing. I wanted kind of like, okay, if I could just find the one way to be, then everybody would like me. If I could just find the best way to sit in my chair, I would never have a back problem. If I could just find the one book to write that I was the best at, then of course I would, be a millionaire. I'm not really into the one true thing anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't think there are truths, I think, or anything. I just have a feeling that we need to keep moving. And just as soon as we're sure we've got something figured out, it's going to bite us in the ass. And, I'm reminded of it so much with this back thing, because basically I could tell you one of two things when my back hurts. One, my back hurts, or two, I haven't been doing my ab exercises. And I can tell you because it's just A, demonstrably true, and B, the minute I got to do my ab exercise, I realized how goddamn sore my stomach is.
You're trading one pain for another.
Right, I'm trading one pain for another, although in this case, I'd rather trade that way.
Trading one pain for another made me smile because I often joke about this with patients. We laugh about how the pain of tissue treatment is just helping them forget about the pain they came in with. And actually, in some cases, this is part of what is at play. Pain is a two-way process. We can feel pain because of physical or chemical insults to our body parts. We can also hurt because of how our brain handles the information in the body without any change to those body parts that are in pain. This is basically when something happening in the brain causes us to feel less pain. It's part of why we sometimes feel pain relief in one area, because more intense pain information from another area is bombarding the brain. All right, neurological phenomena aside, what's the bottom line for Steve?
And I would say if there's a key to anything, it's have a really good mix of people in your life.
I like that. That's a great place to end. Love it. Thank you, Steve.
A really good mix of people. Notice he didn't say balance. Other people do help us gain perspective and maybe lead to meaningful conversations and a few ahas here and there. At first listen, at the beginning of the editing process, my time with Steve struck me as just another goofy conversation. And yet, it turns out Steve was full of inadvertent nuggets of wisdom, all just from talking about his standard low back pain. I wonder which nuggets resonated with you. What about this idea of having lifelong pain? Is there a pain that has just become part of your life? Is it a souvenir, maybe, from a time in your life where there might have been a powerful lesson that you don't want to forget? Have you done what you need to do to learn the lesson? Only you can decide what's true for you. There are also many tangible, non-mysterious triggers to pain that keep us from completely healing up. And so we stay vulnerable. Once injured, it can be like we've worn a groove somewhere that's easier and easier to fall back into each time it happens. It's not always about a deep, esoteric life lesson, but in order to achieve full wellness and a healthy mix, not obsessively striving for constant balance, right? Maybe it's just a good idea to stay open to revisiting your situation with new eyes once in a while. How we think about things, our belief systems, determine more than we realize and can change the pain experience profoundly. I choose to believe that change is always possible. Some might say it's inevitable, so why not see what you can do to work things in your favor? That wraps up another conversation about everyday pain. Please join me for another episode next week with more explorations of why it hurts, how to make it stop, and keep it from happening again. If you have thoughts about this episode or want to share your own experience with pain, please join the Everyday Pain Forum on Facebook groups. If groups aren't your thing, you can just like and follow the Everyday Pain Guide Facebook page or check out tweets by @KnowEverydayPain. Our theme music is by Eric N. Magill with music excerpts from Samuel Vassy. Guests' names are sometimes altered to protect their privacy. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I hope you also find a way to talk about your pain.